Cassandra moved through the crowded streets of Valara Prime with her head down, avoiding the crystalline reflections that bounced off every surface. The city was beautiful, built from the same luminous crystal that grew from every Valaxi skin. Towers reached toward the purple sky, each one glowing with the combined light of thousands of her people. But Cass didn't glow. Her skin was dull, clouded like frosted glass. Everyone who saw her knew immediately what she was, an orphan. She hurried toward the Galactic Archive, the building where she worked. It sat on the edge of the lower district, far from the gleaming central towers where the important families lived. The archive was made of imported materials, gray and solid, housing data from 100 different worlds. Most Valaxi considered it beneath them to work there, surrounded by alien technology and information. But for Kes, it was sanctuary. The door slid open and she stepped inside, breathing easier in the quiet halls. Her workstation was in the back, away from the public terminals. She settled into her chair and pulled up the day's cataloging tasks. Ships had arrived from 3 different systems, each carrying historical records that needed sorting and preservation. It was tedious work, but Cass enjoyed it. Here, surrounded by the stories of other worlds, she could forget about her own problems. "Morning, Cass," a cheerful voice called out. She looked up to see Marcus Chen walking toward her with a smile. The human was tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything. He visited the archive almost every day, researching Valaxi culture for his reports back to Earth's diplomatic corps. Over the past few months, they had developed an easy friendship. "Good morning, Dr. Chen," she replied, managing a small smile. "I've told you a dozen times. Just call me Marcus." He pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. "You look tired. Everything okay?" Cass hesitated. Marcus was kind, but he was also human. He didn't understand how things worked on Valara Prime. How could he? His people chose their partners based on love and compatibility. They didn't have family councils deciding who was worthy of bonding and who wasn't. "I'm fine," she said quietly. The mating conclave is in 2 weeks." Marcus frowned. "That's the big ceremony, right? Where everyone pairs up." "Where those who are deemed worthy pair up," Cass corrected. She tried to keep her voice neutral, but bitterness crept in anyway. "It's my last year of eligibility. After this, if I'm not chosen, I'll be declared unbondable." "What happens then?" "Exile to the outer colonies. Away from the home world, away from society." She touched her dull crystalline arm. "No one wants to bond with an orphan, Marcus. We have no lineage to trace, no genetic advantages to offer. In Valaxi culture, that makes us worthless." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. "That's insane. You're one of the smartest people I've met. You speak 4 languages. You can navigate databases that make my head spin. And you've taught me more about galactic history than my professors ever did. How does any of that make you worthless?" "Because I can't pass on a strong telepathic lineage. Because my children wouldn't strengthen anyone's family line." Cass looked down at her hands. "I've been rejected 17 times, Marcus. 17 potential matches, all from lower-tier families who couldn't attract better prospects. Even they don't want me." "Then they're idiots," Marcus said firmly. Despite everything, Cass laughed. It was such a human response, direct and uncomplicated. "You don't understand our ways." "Maybe not, but I understand people. On Earth, we choose partners based on who they are, not what their great-grandparents accomplished." He met her eyes. "If I were Valaxi, I'd choose you in a heartbeat." The words hung in the air between them. Cass felt something shift in her chest, a strange warmth that had nothing to do with telepathy. Before she could respond, Marcus's communicator chimed. He glanced at it and sighed. "I have to go." meeting with the cultural liaison. He stood up, then paused. "Hey, Cass, don't let them make you believe you're worthless. You're not." He left, and Cass sat alone in the quiet archive. His words echoed in her mind. "If I were Valaxi, I'd choose you." It was a throwaway comment, something a kind friend would say. But it sparked an idea, dangerous and audacious. That evening, Cass went home to her small apartment in the lower district. She pulled up her personal terminal and began researching. She searched through Galactic Union regulations, cross-species relationship precedents, and most importantly, the exact wording of Valaxi bonding law. Hours passed as she read. The laws were ancient, written thousands of years ago when the Valaxi were alone in their corner of space. They spoke of genetic compatibility, family approval, and social standing. But nowhere, in all the complex legal language, did they explicitly forbid bonding with another species. It simply had never occurred to anyone to try. Cass pulled up records of cross-species partnerships in the wider galaxy. They were rare but not unheard of. Usually, they were political arrangements between powerful families on different worlds. Sometimes, they were between diplomats or scientists working in isolated stations. She found 3 cases of Valaxi bonding with other telepathic species, all approved because they brought genetic advantages. But a Valaxi and a human? She found no precedent. Humans weren't telepathic. They brought no genetic benefits that Valaxi society valued. On paper, it made no sense. But on paper, Cass was already worthless. She had nothing to lose. The next morning, she arrived at the archive early and waited for Marcus. When he appeared, she asked if they could talk privately. They went to one of the small research rooms in the back. "I need to ask you something," Cass began, her voice shaking slightly. "And I need you to hear me out before you answer." Marcus looked concerned. "Of course. What's going on?" "The conclave is in 12 days. If I'm not chosen, I'll be exiled." She took a deep breath. "But there's a loophole in our laws. They don't forbid bonding with other species. It's never been done with a human. But it's not technically illegal." Marcus's eyes widened as he began to understand where she was going. "I'm asking if you would consent to a formal mate bond declaration at the conclave." Cass said quickly, "It would be symbolic, just for show. After the ceremony, we could dissolve it quietly. But it would save me from exile. It would prove that I was chosen, that I have value." "Cass, I know it's asking a lot. I know it could cause problems for you with your superiors. But Marcus, I'm desperate. You're the only person who's ever treated me like I matter." Her voice cracked. "Please." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Cass could see him thinking, weighing the consequences. Finally, he spoke. "If we do this, it won't be just for show," he said seriously. "I won't pretend to bond with you and then throw you away. If I stand up at that conclave, it'll be real. A real commitment, at least as friends and partners. Can you accept that?" Cass felt tears forming in her eyes. She nodded. "Then yes," Marcus said. "I'll do it." The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Cass and Marcus had to navigate a maze of bureaucratic requirements that neither of them had fully anticipated. The mating conclave wasn't just a social event. It was a legal process with forms, witnesses, and compatibility assessments. Cass spent her evenings teaching Marcus about Valaxi customs. They sat in her apartment, her terminal projecting holographic displays of proper bonding ceremonies. Marcus watched with focused attention, asking questions and taking notes on his datapad. "So, when the matriarch asks about intent, I have to respond in formal register?" Marcus practiced the Valaxi phrase, his pronunciation awkward but earnest. "Yes, and you have to make eye contact. Direct eye contact shows honesty and commitment." Cass demonstrated, meeting his gaze. For a moment, neither of them looked away. The air between them felt charged with something unnamed. Marcus cleared his throat and looked back at his notes. What about the telepathic compatibility test? That's going to be our biggest challenge, Cass admitted. Humans can't truly telepath, but we can use a neural interface. It'll let you broadcast basic emotional intent. I've already requested one from the Archive's medical division. Will they approve it? They have to. The law requires accommodation for physical differences between bonding partners. When Valaxi bond with Zirathi or Mindarin mates, similar technology is used. She hesitated. The real problem is what comes after we file the paperwork. The next morning, they submitted their formal declaration of intent to bond. By afternoon, the entire Valaxi communication network was buzzing with the news. Cassandra, the orphan that no one wanted, had found a mate. A human mate. Cass's supervisor at the archive called her into his office. Velkan was an older Valaxi with bright, clear crystal skin that marked his high lineage. He looked at her with something between confusion and concern. "Is this true?" he asked, gesturing to his terminal where the declaration was displayed. "You're bonding with the human researcher?" "Yes, sir." "Cass, I've always valued your work, but this is..." He struggled for words. "This is unprecedented. Do you understand the position you're putting yourself in? The attention this will bring?" "I understand, sir." Velkan sighed. "The elite families are already talking. Some are angry, calling it a mockery of tradition. Others think you're making a spectacle of yourself." He leaned forward. "Why are you doing this?" Cass met his eyes. "Because I refuse to be exiled for something I had no control over. I didn't choose to be orphaned. I didn't choose to have no lineage. But I can choose this." Her supervisor studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. You have my support, for what it's worth. But Cass, be prepared. The conclave won't be easy." He was right. Over the next few days, Cass faced hostility everywhere she went. In the market, other Valaxi whispered and pointed. At the archive, colleagues who had been cordial now avoided her. She received 3 anonymous messages calling her a disgrace to their species. Marcus faced his own challenges. His superior at the Human Diplomatic Corps, Ambassador Williams, summoned him for a very uncomfortable conversation. "Do you understand what you're doing?" Williams demanded, pacing his office. "This could create a diplomatic incident. The Valaxi government hasn't issued an official response yet, but we're hearing concerns from multiple sources." "I'm participating in a local cultural practice, Ambassador," Marcus said calmly. "Isn't that exactly what cultural exchange is supposed to be about?" "Not when it causes chaos. The Valaxi have a rigid social structure. You're not just participating. You're challenging the foundation of their society." "Maybe their foundation needs to be challenged," Marcus replied. "They're treating people as worthless based on circumstances beyond their control." "How is that different from any other form of discrimination?" "How is that different from any other form of discrimination? Is that different from any other form of discrimination?" Williams rubbed his temples. "I can't order you not to do this. But I can tell you that if this goes badly, Earth won't be able to protect you from the consequences." "I understand, sir." Despite the warnings and the growing social pressure, Cass and Marcus continued their preparations. The neural interface arrived, a delicate piece of technology that would allow Marcus to participate in the telepathic portion of the ceremony. Cass helped him practice using it. "You just think of an emotion strongly, and the interface translates it into a telepathic signal," she explained, attaching the small device behind his ear. "Try it now. Think of something that makes you happy." Marcus closed his eyes. A moment later, Cass felt a warm pulse of emotion through her telepathic sense. Joy mixed with contentment. It was simpler than a Valaxi's telepathic signal, less complex, but undeniably genuine. "I felt it," she said, smiling. "What were you thinking about?" "The first time we met," Marcus said. "You were explaining the cataloging system to me, and you got so excited about this ancient Zerathi text you discovered. Your whole face lit up. I remember thinking that I wanted to see that expression more often." Kes felt her crystal skin warm with what her people would recognize as a blush. "That was 7 months ago. I have a good memory for important moments." Their eyes met again, and this time the charged feeling between them was impossible to ignore. Kes looked away first, flustered. "We should practice the formal responses," she said quickly. As the conclave drew closer, they spent more and more time together. Marcus moved through the preparations with steady determination, refusing to be discouraged by the whispers or the warnings. Kes found herself relying on his calm presence, his unwavering support. On the evening before the conclave, they sat together in the archive after closing. The building was dark, except for the soft glow of their workstation. "Are you scared?" Marcus asked. "Terrified," Kes admitted. "Tomorrow, we'll stand in front of the matriarchs, the family councils, everyone important in Valaxi society. And they'll all be watching, waiting for us to fail. Then, we won't fail," Marcus said simply. "You make it sound easy." "It's not easy, but it's right." He turned to face her fully. "Kes, I need you to know something. When I agreed to this, I told you it would be real for me. I meant that. This isn't just about saving you from exile anymore. Over these past weeks, getting to know you better, preparing together, I've realized that you're one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. Valaxi or human or anything else." Kes's breath caught. "Marcus, I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "I just wanted you to know that when I stand up tomorrow and declare my choice, there won't be any pretending involved. I'm choosing you because I want to." For a long moment, Kes couldn't speak. Finally, she found her voice. "I proposed this bond out of desperation, but somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like a desperate measure. It started feeling like maybe it was what I wanted too, not just as an escape, but as something real. Then tomorrow, we'll make it real together," Marcus said. They sat in the quiet archive as the twin moons rose over Valara Prime, both of them aware that the next day would change everything. For better or worse, they would face it together. Kes reached out and took Marcus's hand. His skin was warm and solid, so different from the cool crystal of her own people. But it felt right. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when no one else would." "Thank you for letting me," Marcus replied. Neither of them slept much that night. The conclave would begin at dawn. The Great Hall of Valara Prime was magnificent. Carved from a single massive crystal formation, it caught the morning light and split it into thousands of rainbow reflections. Hundreds of Valaxi filled the ceremonial space, their crystalline skin creating a sea of shifting colors. Family banners hung from the high ceiling, each one representing bloodlines that stretched back thousands of years. Kes stood in the waiting area with Marcus, both of them dressed in formal ceremony clothes. Her gown was simple, the pale gray of unbonded status. Marcus wore adapted formal wear from his own culture, dark and dignified. The neural interface was barely visible behind his ear. Around them, other couples waited for their turn. Kes recognized several of them from the pre-conclave gatherings. They had all been matched by their families, their genetic compatibility calculated and approved. They looked confident, excited. When they noticed Kes and Marcus, they whispered and turned away. "Pair 73, an official called. Cassandra and Marcus Chun." The whispers stopped. Every head turned toward them. Kes felt her skin prickle with awareness as hundreds of eyes focused on her and the human at her side. "Ready?" Marcus asked quietly. Cass nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked together into the main hall. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Cass kept her head high, focusing on the raised platform where the 5 matriarchs sat. These were the eldest and most powerful Valaxi, the guardians of tradition and law. In the center sat Matriarch Veltara, her crystal skin so ancient and complex it seemed to contain entire galaxies. Cass and Marcus climbed the steps to the platform. An official stepped forward with a data tablet. "Present your declaration of intent," he said formally. Marcus handed over their paperwork. The official's eyebrows rose as he read it, but he passed it to Matriarch Veltara without comment. The ancient Valaxi studied the documents, her face unreadable. The hall had gone completely silent. Finally, she looked up at Cass and Marcus. "This is unprecedented," Veltara said, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "In 10,000 years of recorded history, no Valaxi has sought to bond with a human. Cassandra, you are aware that this match brings no genetic advantage to our people?" "Yes, Matriarch," Cass replied, keeping her voice steady. "You are aware that offspring from such a union would have uncertain telepathic ability?" "Yes, Matriarch." "Then explain to this council why we should approve a bond that violates every principle of genetic advancement our society holds sacred." Before Cass could answer, Matriarch Veltara raised a hand. "Furthermore, explain what possible benefit a human could gain from bonding with an orphan of no lineage, no family standing, and no social value." The words were designed to hurt, to remind Cass of her place. They worked. She felt tears threatening, felt her confidence crumbling. But then Marcus stepped forward. "With respect, Matriarch, I'd like to answer that question," he said. Veltara's eyes narrowed. "Speak, human." Marcus faced the assembled crowd, his voice clear and strong. "You ask what benefit I gain. I gain a partner who is brilliant, brave, and kind. I gain someone who speaks 4 languages, who can navigate databases and ancient texts that would take your scholars weeks to decipher. I gain someone who works harder than anyone I've met because she's had to fight for every scrap of respect she's earned." He turned back to the matriarchs. "On Earth, we have a saying, don't judge a book by its cover. It means that external appearances don't define value. You look at Cass and see an orphan with no lineage. I look at Cass and see someone extraordinary." "Pretty words," another matriarch said coldly. "But bonding is about more than sentiment. It's about strengthening our people through genetic selection." "Then your system is broken," Marcus said bluntly. Gasps echoed through the hall. "You didn't challenge the matriarchs directly." But Marcus continued, his tone respectful but firm. "You've bred for telepathic strength for so long that you've forgotten the breed for adaptability, for creativity, for survival. My people survived on Earth because we valued diversity, not genetic purity. We thrived because we chose partners based on who they were, not what their ancestors accomplished." "How dare you?" one matriarch began. But Veltara silenced her with a gesture. "Let him finish," the elder said, studying Marcus with newfound interest. "Cass has survived in a society designed to exclude her," Marcus continued. "She's adapted, learned, grown stronger because of the challenges you put in her way. That's not weakness. That's evolution. That's exactly the kind of strength your society needs as you integrate into the wider galaxy." The hall erupted in angry murmurs. But before the matriarchs could respond, Cass found her own voice. "He's right," she said, loudly enough to be heard over the noise. "I'm an orphan. I have no lineage to offer. But I'm not worthless. I've spent my whole life proving that. And if this council rejects my bonding, it won't be because I'm not good enough. It'll be because your laws are too rigid to accommodate anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of value. You speak boldly for someone asking for approval," Veltara observed. I'm done asking for approval, Kes said, surprised by her own courage. I'm asserting my right under Valaxi law to choose my own mate. That law doesn't forbid bonding with other species. It doesn't require genetic advantage. Those are traditions you've built around the law, but they're not the law itself. She pulled out her own datapad and projected the relevant legal codes into the air. Article 47, Section 12. Any Valaxi of legal age may enter a bonding contract with any willing partner, subject to mutual consent and public declaration. There's no mention of species requirements, no mention of genetic benefits, just consent and declaration. Matriarch Veltara's expression shifted subtly. It might have been respect, or it might have been irritation. You've done your research. I had to. No one else was going to advocate for me. The matriarchs conferred in rapid telepathic communication, too fast and complex for Kes to follow. Marcus stood beside her, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. Together they waited as their fate was decided. Finally, Veltara raised her hand for silence. This council has deliberated. The law, as Cassandra has correctly cited, does not explicitly forbid this bonding. However, precedent and tradition are not the same as law, Kes interrupted. Every Valaxi in the hall gasped at the interruption, but Kes pressed on. With respect, matriarch, either we are a society of laws or a society of traditions. If laws can be overridden by tradition whenever it's convenient, then we're not the advanced civilization we claim to be. Careful, child, Veltara warned, but there was no real anger in her tone. You're testing boundaries that have stood for millennia. Maybe those boundaries need testing, Kes replied. Silence stretched out. Then, unexpectedly, Matriarch Veltara's lips curved in the slightest smile. Very well, she said. This bonding is approved as an experimental cultural exchange. Should offspring result, they will be monitored by the Genetic Council. Should the bond prove detrimental to either party, it may be reviewed. She looked directly at Kes. But under the law, as you have so expertly pointed out, we cannot deny your choice. The hall exploded in voices. Some angry, some shocked, some quietly pleased. Kes felt dizzy with relief and disbelief. The official stepped forward again. Present yourselves for the telepathic compatibility demonstration. This was the final test. Kes and Marcus faced each other, and she opened her telepathic sense. Marcus, using the neural interface, projected his intent toward her. It came through clearly, determination, respect, and something deeper that made her crystal skin warm. Affection. Genuine affection. She projected back, letting him feel her gratitude, her fear, and her own growing feelings for him. Compatibility confirmed, the official announced, though he sounded reluctant. Then by the authority of this council, the bond between Cassandra and Marcus Chen is recognized, Veltara declared. May it serve as a reminder that our laws exist for a reason, and that reason must sometimes overcome tradition. As they descended from the platform, registered as bonded mates, Kes and Marcus walked through a crowd that parted around them like water around stone. Some faces showed disgust. Others showed curiosity. A few, mostly from the lower districts and lesser families, showed hope. Outside the great hall, in the bright morning sun, Marcus turned to Kes. We did it, he said. We did, Kes agreed. Then, impulsively, she pulled him into an embrace. It wasn't a traditional Valaxi gesture, but she'd learned it from him. It felt right. Whatever came next, they would face it together. 3 months after the conclave, life had settled into a new rhythm. Kes and Marcus shared an apartment now, a modest space in the middle districts. It was better than Kes's old home in the lower levels, but still far from the crystalline towers where the elite families lived. They were social outcasts among the Valaxi upper classes, but Kes found she didn't care as much as she'd expected. Marcus had been officially appointed as a permanent cultural liaison. Cass continued her work at the archive, though she'd been promoted to senior curator. Other Valachi from lesser families and orphan backgrounds had started reaching out to her, treating her as a symbol of change. It was strange and uncomfortable, but also hopeful. Then the Karsan came. The first attack happened on a mining colony in the outer system. 20 Valaxi workers were killed before anyone knew what was happening. By the time the defense fleet arrived, the Karsan raiders had vanished into dark space. Cass learned about it when emergency alerts started flashing across her terminal at the archive. Marcus rushed in moments later, his face grim. "There's been an attack," he said. "The Karsan Collective. They hit the Tertius mining station." "I saw," Cass replied, pulling up news feeds. 20 dead. How did they get past the defense perimeter? That's what everyone's asking. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more attacks followed. Each one was swift and brutal. The Karsan seemed to know exactly where the Valaxi defenses were weakest. They struck at supply lines, communication relays, and isolated outposts. The Valaxi military, organized around traditional command structures based on family lineage, responded with tactics that hadn't changed in generations. They were failing. Cass watched the news with growing horror. The Karsan were moving closer to Valara Prime with each attack. The military kept insisting they had everything under control. But the casualty numbers told a different story. Marcus spent long hours in meetings with human military advisors who'd been rushed to Valara Prime. When he came home each night, he looked exhausted and frustrated. "They won't listen," he told Cass one evening. "We're trying to share tactical data, offer suggestions based on Earth's experience with asymmetric warfare. But the Valaxi commanders keep insisting on their traditional strategies." "Traditional strategies that aren't working," Cass said quietly. "Exactly. The Karsan are using guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, psychological warfare. The Valaxi are trying to fight them like it's a formal military engagement between equal forces. It's a disaster." Cass thought about this as she worked the next day. The archive had become less busy as fear of the attacks grew. Many Valaxi were staying home, preparing shelters, hoarding supplies. But Cass kept coming to work. Here, surrounded by data from 100 worlds, she might find something useful. She started pulling up old Valaxi military records, going back thousands of years. Most of it was what she expected: formal battle strategies, fleet deployments, traditional tactics based on superior technology and telepathic coordination. But then she found something interesting, buried in the archives from before the Valaxi had achieved their current social structure. Was a collection of ancient defense protocols. These dated back to a time when Valar Prime had faced raids from nomadic species, before the Valaxi had spaceflight, before their society became obsessed with lineage and tradition. These ancient tactics were completely different from modern doctrine. They emphasized flexibility, unpredictability, and using knowledge of local terrain to offset superior enemy numbers. They were, Cass realized with excitement, exactly what was needed against the Karsan. She immediately contacted Marcus. Within hours, they were in a meeting with human military advisors and, reluctantly, several Valaxi commanders. General Castorin, the highest-ranking Valaxi military leader, looked at the data Cass had presented with barely concealed disdain. "These are primitive tactics from before our civilization achieved greatness. We don't conduct warfare like savages anymore." "With respect, General, your current tactics aren't working," Marcus said carefully. "The Karsan have destroyed 6 facilities and killed over 200 of your people in 3 weeks. We are adapting our strategies." "You're not adapting," Cass interrupted. She'd learned from Marcus that sometimes directness was necessary. "You're repeating the same approaches and expecting different results. Every attack follows the same pattern. You deploy your fleet in standard formation. The Karsan strike somewhere you're not, and by the time you respond, they're gone. And you think primitive tactics will somehow succeed where modern military science fails? Castorn's crystal skin flashed with anger. I think unpredictability will succeed where predictability fails, Kes replied. The Karsan have studied your tactics. They know exactly how you'll respond, because you always respond the same way. You have to become unpredictable. Colonel Hayes, one of the human advisors, leaned forward. We've also been analyzing the pattern of Karsan attacks. They're not random. They're testing new defenses, probing for weak points. Their next target will almost certainly be one of the orbital shipyards. It's the logical progression. The shipyards are heavily defended, Castoran said. They wouldn't dare. They'll dare if they think they can win, Marcus said. Which brings us back to Kess's point. If you defend the shipyards using standard protocols, the Karsan will have planned for that. You need to do something they won't expect. The meeting went on for hours. Finally, reluctantly, General Castoran agreed to review the ancient tactics and consider the human recommendations. But Cass could see he didn't really believe in them. As she and Marcus left the military headquarters, Cass felt a strange determination building. They're not going to change, are they? Not the upper command, Marcus admitted. They're too invested in the old ways. Then we go around them, Cass said. You told me there are Valaxi from lesser families in the military, right? Lower ranks who might be more open to new ideas. Marcus's eyes lit up with understanding. You want to build a coalition from the bottom up. Exactly. Over the next week, Cass and Marcus worked tirelessly. They reached out to junior officers, soldiers from lesser families, and technical specialists who'd been sidelined by the rigid hierarchy. Cass became the voice for change, using her status as the orphan who challenged the conclave to inspire others who felt excluded by the system. They found allies in unexpected places. Lieutenant Senna, a tactical officer from a minor family, brought 3 other junior officers with her. Engineer Corvus, whose brilliant technical innovations had been ignored because his lineage wasn't prestigious enough, offered to help develop new defensive systems based on the ancient protocols. Word reached them that a Karsan fleet was indeed moving toward the orbital shipyards. General Castoran deployed the defense fleet in standard formation, ignoring all suggestions for alternative strategies. But Cass, Marcus, and their growing group of allies had prepared something else. They'd formed a volunteer auxiliary force, made up of Valaxi from lesser families and even some humans from the diplomatic corps who had military backgrounds. They'd studied the ancient tactics, combined them with human guerrilla warfare principles, and created something new. When the Karsan attacked, they found the main Valaxi fleet exactly where they expected it. The battle began as the Karsan had planned, with their ships using superior maneuverability to strike and retreat before the rigid Valaxi formations could respond. But then the auxiliary force struck from an unexpected angle. Small, fast ships piloted by volunteers implemented the ancient flanking maneuvers Cass had discovered. They didn't fight like a traditional military force. They fought like defenders protecting their home, using every advantage of local knowledge and unpredictable tactics. The Karsan, caught off guard, suddenly found themselves fighting on 2 fronts. The human advisors coordinated between the auxiliary force and the main fleet, creating a level of real-time tactical flexibility the Valaxi had never achieved before. In the command center, Cass monitored the battle feeds alongside Marcus and the volunteer coordinators. She watched as the tactics she'd found in ancient archives, combined with human innovation, turned the tide of the battle. It's working, Marcus said, gripping her hand. They're retreating. The Karsan fleet broke off the attack and fled into dark space. Having suffered significant losses for the first time since the raids began. as news of the victory spread. General Castoran tried to claim credit for the auxiliary forces' success. But too many people knew the truth. The rigid military hierarchy had failed. Innovation from unlikely sources had succeeded. Cass stood with Marcus and their allies as reports came in. They'd saved the shipyards. They'd proved that adaptability mattered as much as tradition. And they'd shown that value wasn't determined by lineage, but by what individuals could accomplish when given the chance. "This is just the beginning," Cass said quietly. Marcus nodded. "The beginning of real change." The victory over the Carson forced conversations that the Valaxi elite had been avoiding for generations. Within days of the battle, the matriarchs called an emergency council of reform. It was the first such council in over 1,000 years. Cass found herself invited to attend, not as a supplicant, but as a participant. She walked into the council chamber with Marcus at her side, aware that 6 months ago she would have been barred from even entering this building. Now, representatives from lesser families filled half the seats, and several human advisors stood among the observers. Matriarch Valtara opened the proceedings with unexpected directness. "The war with the Carson has revealed weaknesses in our society that we can no longer ignore. Our military structure, based solely on lineage, failed to adapt to an unconventional threat. Our social structure prevented us from recognizing talent and innovation from unexpected sources. This must change." The debate that followed was intense. Conservative voices argued that the victory was an exception, that abandoning tradition would destroy what made the Valaxi strong. But they were countered by growing numbers who'd seen the cost of rigidity. Lieutenant Senna stood and addressed the council. "I am from a minor family. My tactical scores were among the highest in my academy class, but I was assigned to a backwater monitoring station because my lineage wasn't considered prestigious enough. How many others like me have been wasted by this system?" Engineer Corvus spoke next. "I've designed 3 revolutionary shield modifications. All were rejected by the Military Research Division because I couldn't claim descent from the founder families. Meanwhile, inferior designs from high lineage engineers were approved and failed in actual combat. Our obsession with bloodlines is literally getting people killed." One by one, voices rose from across the chamber. The orphaned, the lesser families, those who'd been excluded and dismissed. They all had stories of wasted potential, of being judged by circumstances they couldn't control. When Kess was called to speak, she stood with her heart pounding. 6 months of experience had made her braver, but addressing the most powerful Valaxi in their society still terrified her. "I am an orphan," she began, her voice steady. "According to our traditions, that made me worthless. I was going to be exiled, thrown away like defective material. But I found a human who saw past my lack of lineage. And together, we proved that value comes from what we do, not where we come from." She gestured to the data display showing the battle analysis. The tactics that saved our shipyards came from ancient archives that everyone had forgotten. The coordination that made them work came from human military theory. The courage to implement them came from Valaxi, who had nothing to lose because society had already told them they were nothing. We succeeded because we ignored tradition and focused on what worked. "You speak as if tradition has no value," one of the conservative matriarchs challenged. "I speak as if tradition should serve us, not control us," Kess replied. "Our ancestors developed those ancient tactics because they worked. Then we abandoned them, not because we found better methods, but because we decided that anything new was inferior to anything old. That's not honoring tradition. That's being trapped by it." The debate continued for 3 days. Finally, the matriarchs announced their decision. Reforms would be implemented. Orphans would no longer be automatically excluded from mate bonding. Military ranks and research positions would be open to merit-based competition. Cross-species cultural exchange would be actively encouraged. It wasn't a revolution. The elite families would still hold significant power. Lineage would still matter in many contexts. But it was a beginning, a crack in the foundation of rigid hierarchy. As the council adjourned, Matriarch Veltara approached Cass privately. "You've caused quite a disturbance, young one." "I never meant to cause problems, Matriarch," Cass said carefully. "Didn't you?" Veltara's ancient eyes seemed to see straight through her. "I think you meant to cause exactly the right kind of problems. The kind that force necessary change." She paused. "The archive is being expanded into an interspecies cultural exchange center. We'll need a director. Someone who understands both Galaxy culture and the wider galaxy. Someone who's proven they can bridge differences." Cass's eyes widened. "You're offering me the position?" "I'm offering you the opportunity to prove your worth through action rather than lineage. Isn't that what you've been arguing for?" A slight smile crossed Veltara's crystalline features. "Besides, you've already demonstrated you're willing to fight for what you believe in. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need as we adapt to a changing galaxy." That evening, Cass and Marcus sat on the balcony of their apartment, watching the twin moons rise over the city. Below them, the streets of Valara Prime glowed with the light of thousands of Galaxy going about their lives. The city looked the same as it always had, but Cass knew it was different now. She was different. "Ambassador Williams offered me a permanent posting," Marcus said quietly. "I'd be the lead human representative for Galaxy cultural affairs. It means I'd stay here on Valara Prime indefinitely." Cass turned to look at him. "What did you tell him?" "I said I needed to discuss it with my bonded mate first." Marcus took her hand. "Cass, when we did this, you asked me to pretend. You wanted a symbolic bond to save you from exile. But it stopped being pretend somewhere along the way. At least for me." "For me too," Cass admitted. "I proposed this bond out of desperation. I was so focused on survival that I didn't let myself think about what it could become. But these past months, building something together, fighting for something that matters. Marcus, you didn't just save me from exile. You showed me what it means to be truly chosen. Not because of genetic calculations or family arrangements, but because of who we are to each other. So, when I stand in front of Ambassador Williams tomorrow and accept that permanent posting, I want to be clear about what I'm choosing," Marcus said. "I'm not just choosing a career. I'm choosing you. Not as a political statement or a social experiment, but as my partner. My mate. For real." Cass felt her crystal skin warming, glowing faintly in the moonlight. It was something that happened when Galaxy experienced strong, positive emotions. She'd never glowed like this before, not in her entire life. "I choose you too," she said. "For real. For always." They sat together in comfortable silence, hands intertwined. In the distance, Cass could see the archive building, soon to become the cultural exchange center she would direct. She thought about all the changes coming, all the work still to be done. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. "The reforms, the changes. Will they really stick, or will society eventually slide back to the old ways?" "I think that depends on people like us," Marcus replied. "Change doesn't happen all at once. It happens when individuals make brave choices, day after day. You chose to challenge an unjust system. I chose to stand with you. Others saw that and made their own brave choices. That's how real change works. On Earth, do you have any sayings about that?" "You humans always have sayings." Marcus smiled. "Actually, yes. Be the change you wish to see in the world. An old philosopher named Gandhi said that. It means don't wait for someone else to fix things. Start by being the example yourself. We did that, didn't we?" Cass said, "We became the example." "We did. And look what happened." Below them, in the streets of the Middle District, Cass noticed something she'd never seen before. A Valaxi couple walking hand in hand, one with the bright clear crystal of high lineage, the other with the duller skin of a lesser family. They looked happy together, unashamed. A few blocks away, she spotted what might have been another mixed couple. This time, a Valaxi and a Zerethi. Her bond with Marcus had been scandalous 6 months ago. Now it was becoming a symbol of possibility. Other unlikely pairs were forming, encouraged by their example. The rigid social structure was beginning to crack in more places. Other people are making brave choices too, Cass observed. Because you showed them it was possible, Marcus said. 3 weeks later, the newly renamed Galactic Archive and Cultural Exchange Center opened with an official ceremony. Cass stood at the entrance in her new role as director, welcoming representatives from a dozen different species. The building had been expanded and renovated, but it still felt like home to her. Marcus worked alongside her, coordinating human participation in the exchange programs. They'd also hired engineer Corvus to develop new archive technologies. And Lieutenant Senna had taken a civilian position managing security and logistics. On the opening day, among the dignitaries and officials, Cass noticed a young Valaxi standing nervously near the entrance. The girl's crystal skin was clouded and dull. An orphan. Cass walked over to her. "Hello, I'm Cassandra, the director here. Can I help you with something?" The girl looked up with wide eyes. You're the one who bonded with a human, who challenged the conclave." "I am," Cass said gently. "I'm an orphan too," the girl whispered. "Everyone says I'm worthless. But when I heard what you did, I thought, maybe I'm not. Maybe I could be something more." She held out a datapad. "I applied for the junior research program here. I know it's competitive, and I probably won't get in, but I had to try." Cass took the datapad and reviewed the application. The girl's academic scores were exceptional.